Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Music Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. And I'm showing you something that was made by one of the villagers that absolutely took my breath away. Stunningly gorgeous. And you took my breath away, sir, by sending me this, and Angie and I love it. We know where we're going to put it, and it'll be an important piece of our life. Thank you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this in a second, but wow, what a piece. So, put that right here. Now, this came from a man named Chris out of Idaho. He sent me this. Dave, family, and team, first and foremost, I wanted to say thank you for all your hard work on pumping out the videos. I just recently stumbled upon your channel 2 to 3 months ago, and so thankfully I did. I listen to them every day on my way to work. I can tell you a lot of time is spent on making each one, as I cannot wait to watch them. Thanks, Chris. I've watched all 3 of your videos. After the first one, I knew I was hooked. I can't wait for the next one. Your expertise, dedication, and commitment are above them all. Thank you for everything you do. I wanted to share a gift I made for you all. Hopefully you can find a good spot for it and use it as a backdrop for your videos at home. With love and support from the family, Pinehurst, Idaho. Wow. Chris, you're an artist. You really are. I mean, you are. Thank you. It was sitting in, it's called the library. It was sitting in here, and Angie came home the other day and she kind of smelled it. She goes, "It smells like something's burning." I go, "Yeah, go look in the library." And she goes, "Wow, that is beautiful." Well, Chris knew I'm a patriot, and you're going to see a word about patriotism a lot more from me. It's called liberty. If you don't know what liberty means, look it up. I want you to commit it to memory. I want it to be a very important word in your life. Yeah. Thank you. Now, Chris, if you don't know, we have 700 videos up. The video you're watching right now is number 12 in the Amnesia series. 12. Today I got a super nasty note saying, "Dave, why are you wasting time on these amnesia cases? They're boring and they're irrelevant to 411, and it's just like you're trying to fill our time with garbage." When I get these notes, I try to understand, does the person really think that? Or are they trying to get my goat? Are they trying to just be mean? So I just walked away from it. I came back after lunch and I thought, I gotta say something to this person. I don't think they were being mean. I just think that they're ignorant and they don't see how this all fits into the research. Now, I'm not trying to pound a square peg in a round hole. I honestly think it's all fitting together. And I'm always like 3 or 4 videos ahead of what you're viewing. Because just in case there's an emergency, I want to be able to stack these up so when I leave, you guys have something to watch. But if you're watching a video, 99 times out of 100, I've made it in the last day or 2. But I always have cases lined up on my desks that I could go to next. This case that we're going to talk to you about today, it's a mind bender. And it's one of those incidents where I kind of giggle when people say, "Well, Dave, there's water everywhere. Why are you trying to say that these are all water related?" Okay, fine. This incident involves a man named Stephen Curry. And it's not a really old incident. I mean, to some of you, it must be really old. But compared to the 1930, early 40s cases, this one's more recent. February 17th, 1992, Stephen went missing. He lived in a town called Lakeville, Minnesota. And he was raised the son of a farmer in a city called Litchfield. He was married. He had 6 children for 41 years old. His wife, Carol, played the piano in the school church and also taught Sunday school. And Stephen was a teacher in the school. And it was a First Baptist school. He was someone that was always involved. He was considered like the pillar of the community. He directed the youth and adult choir, and he also helped coach after school boys wrestling and girls volleyball. Nobody could say a bad word about this man. He was committed all the way around. Church, community, kids. I dug deep and hard. Not one bad word from anybody about this man. So who are we talking about? I was lucky to get even one picture, but this is the picture. Wore glasses. He liked to hunt. He liked the outdoors. And we'll get going with the story. On February 16th, 1992, he was going to bed and he told his wife, the next day was President's Day, school was off, and he said, hey, I'm going to get up real early before the kids get up, and I'm going to do some work, go down to the school, clean out my van, and then I'm going to go take a hike over at the power plant. And she goes, okay, great, have fun. So the next morning, he gets up real early, takes off before she gets up, knew it already, goes over to the school, and is cleaning out his van. They had all the equipment there. Nobody thought it was strange. Some people saw him there, said hi. And then at about 11 o'clock, he calls his wife, Carol, and he says, hey, I'm going to go over to the Prairie Island Refuge and practice shooting and take a hike. She goes, great, have fun. Well, it was someplace that he hunted, but it's also someplace he scoped in his rifle. So he got in his van, left, and he took off for the location. Now, just to give you a reference point, this is Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is the Prairie Island. They called it an Indian community, but there's also a huge power plant down here on the Vermilion River. So kind of southeast from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Figured he got there about noon, took off, was probably going to be there 2 or 3 hours. Well, at 7 o'clock that night, a fisherman was coming out, walked past a van, turned out to be Stephen's van, and the driver's side window was broken out. This fisherman did what I would have done. He called the local police and he said, I think there might have been an auto burglary here. Might want to come out and check it out. So the Red Wing Police Department comes out, checks the van, takes a report, runs the registration on the van, and the registration comes back to Carol and Stephen Curry. They have dispatch get the phone number and they call up Carol and they said, hey, do you know your van's out here? She says, yeah, it's a little odd. He should have been home by now, and he told me he was going there, but it doesn't make sense that he's there this late. He should be home. Police officer says, okay, we'll have a look around. Well, it was already dark, cold, and they looked around. They didn't find anything. So the police officer gets a hold of his supervisor and says, the next day we ought to have a search and rescue call out for this. There's a man missing here. Next day, February 18th. Stephen's still not home. Red Wing Police Department gets a hold of the sheriff. Sheriff gets a hold of canine units, and they start a search of the wildlife area. And you always start searches before the outside area gets contaminated. You start the search from where the person was absolutely last known to be seen. Where was that? His van. So the sheriff had gotten an item from Carol that would be a scent bait. They gave it to the dog, and the dog starts to go, starts to walk, with determination and knowledge of apparently where it was going. Dog walks a quarter of a mile, and it goes up onto a footbridge up over the Vermilion River, and mid-span stops. I've done a lot of searches. I've never seen a dog do that. How could it stop in the middle of a bridge? So, when you're searching, there's only a couple things you can explain. When they stop in the middle of a bridge, either they went over the bridge and down into the water, or they went up into the sky. There's no in between, folks. There's no in between. And I'm sure that the canine handlers were going, let's do this again. And they went back and they did it again, and the dog did the same thing. And it wasn't as though he went out to the middle of the bridge and came back, because the dog stopped in the middle of the bridge, so there wasn't a return path. Well, at that point, the police believed that Stephen was in the water, and they made a call for their dive team, which would have been the appropriate call by for sure. The next day, on the 20th, or on the 19th rather, they had multiple dive teams in the Vermilion River. It was cold, really cold, murky. Had a tough time seeing anything, couldn't feel anything. Spent 12 hours prepping and being ready to dive in their dry suits. It's a cumbersome, horrible task, trust me. Well, they didn't find anything. So the next day, they get the sheriff's department boat with their side scan sonar to check the river bottom, and that shows everything. You don't miss anything in that. I know I've talked to you in the past about sheriffs missing things with that sonar. No, I don't think they missed anything. I don't think anything was there. And on this instance, they searched for a long time. And as the sheriff is in the boats, as the sheriff's deputies are in the boats working the sonar, another detective is back at Carol's house talking to her about her husband, Stephen, asking him about his demeanor, how many enemies does he have, does he ever take off sometimes, you don't know where he is, has he been acting odd lately, do you have marital issues? No, none. Deputies completely baffled at this point. March 21st. Police set up grid patterns all through this wildlife area. And they had Boy Scouts, they had people from the community, they had relatives, they had everybody trying to help looking for Stephen. They didn't want to give up. Remember that. They did not want to give up. In one of the longest searches I've ever seen in modern times for somebody under these conditions, looks, they searched for almost a month. They didn't give up. It was, and the police kept going back and interviewing people. They interviewed school authorities, his students, other family members. They didn't know what to think of the absence. But at the end of that day, the last day was February 21st. They had nothing. There was no clothing found, no hunting gear, no nothing. But the profile they had from interviewing everyone they did was a very stable, dedicated church and family man. Everyone was believing at this point he was in the river somewhere. They weren't sure how they could have missed him. But they were frustrated. And Carol was dealing with 6 kids in her family that were without their dad. And imagine a mom now being without the husband for almost a month, having no answers and trying to carry on. And the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner for the family's gone. Yeah, what do you do about that? Well, 3 days after the search and rescue is over, this made huge news in the communities out there. Huge news. Everyone was talking about it. Hundreds of people participated in the search. They didn't know what to think. But he was somebody who everyone knew. And remember that. It wasn't like he wasn't known because his picture was in the paper all the time as well. So 3 days after the search terminates, March 24th, because the last day of the search was March 9th. March 24th, a woman in Litchfield, Minnesota, gets a knock on the door. It's a rural house, very odd to get knocks on the door. She didn't hear anybody drive up. She opens the door and she sees a person standing there that's very haggard, tired, dirty. And they look up and they say, "I don't know who I am, but something looks familiar here." The woman who answered the door was a woman named Sharon Reinke. Sharon's family purchased the Curry family ranch from Stephen's parents. And she knew Stephen. And when she opened the door, she did a quadruple take because she was looking at somebody who had a 5 weeks growth of beard and looked entirely different from the Stephen she knew. And she was perplexed and bothered. Imagine that. You're in the middle of nowhere in a farm, ranch. You open the door and there's this person there you kind of knew. It'd be kind of scary a little bit. So she recognizes Stephen, invites him in, and immediately gets on the phone because she's really good friends with Stephen's brother and his mom, who lived just down the road. And she called him. And as she's waiting for them to get there, she calls his wife and says, "I think you have your husband here." Okay, so the wife's coming too. She told Stephen what his name was. And she said he didn't even flinch. There was no recognition on his face at all. And she asked him, how did he get here? And he said that he thinks he hitchhiked from Minneapolis and then was dropped off 2 miles away and walked over. She said, "Do you have any ID with you or a wallet or something?" "Nothing." "Do you have any money?" "I have $40 in my pocket." Couldn't answer where he got that. So now, you're Sharon. You kind of have the basics of what happened. But Sharon also knew that Stephen had been missing for weeks. So the family starts to arrive. First his mom and his brother came together, and then his wife. Stephen didn't recognize his mom, didn't recognize his brother, and didn't recognize his wife. And when his brother said, "Well, your 6 kids are going to be anxious to see you, Stephen," he got a very perplexed look on his face. And he said, I have 6 kids? I laugh about that because that's probably the way I would have looked. If you would have told me when I was a dad, you got 6 kids? I do. Yeah, you do, Stephen. You had 6 kids. And originally, the brother and the mom and the wife couldn't believe what they were looking at because they'd never seen him with a 5 weeks growth of beard. He looked entirely different. He was somebody who was always very well kept, very neat, very clean, and you were seeing somebody who was just the opposite of that. So the wife, the brother, and the mom kind of meet and they decide, what are we going to do? And they all agreed that it would be best if Stephen went home with the wife and maybe the kids could instigate something in his mind to wake him up because he wasn't remembering anything. He didn't remember anything other than someone dropping him off 2 miles from the Reinke house. That was his last memory. And he couldn't remember anything before that as well. So he has serious amnesia. Well, the wife took him home and called the physician, the family physician. The doctor came over and stated it's obvious he's had a bad case of amnesia, and I just want him to rest in bed for a full day, and then we'll make another judgment about it. So that was March 24th. March 25th, he spent the day in bed. Well, March 26th, the Red Wing Police Department had heard about Stephen being found. And the detective and the police chief stated that they wanted to interview him about what happened. Understandable. So they came out to the house, and in a room, they interviewed him for 3 hours. At the end of the 3 hours, they stated that he maintained his story perfectly, just like you would expect somebody with no memory. He didn't remember anything from his past 5 weeks. Didn't know where he'd been. Didn't know where he got the money. Didn't know how he fed himself, took care of himself. Didn't know anything. But the police chief stated that one thing's absolutely clear is that no crime occurred that we can tell. And that as far as they were concerned, the case was closed. From a law enforcement perspective, it makes sense. The only thing I would question at this point, and maybe they did a physical exam on him, is that did he get beat up? Is this amnesia caused by injury, a bump on the head, something? I'm not a doctor, who knows? March 27th, the same family physician came out and said, I think you need to take Stephen to Minneapolis Hospital and he needs to go in for testing. And the family all agreed to this. So Carol drove him down to the hospital, checked him in. His brother and his mom were there. And they agreed that he was going to go through an advanced stage of psychological testing and make sure that he's physically fit and not injured. I think that's wholly appropriate. So he checks in on March 28th. April 5th, Stephen's released from the hospital. The physician stated that physically he's fine. No injuries at all. And that he had started to remember bits and pieces of information going back into his past. They had no physical explanation for his amnesia. None. Well, that goes all the way back to what we've talked about before. Many people who have been abducted have no physical reason for their amnesia. It's almost transitory. It happens at one period of time and it ends at another period of time, and over time it'll slowly come back, except that period where you weren't here. Then that may never come back. Now, why is this case important to Dave? And it should be important to you. I'm sure if there was an audience here, I could ask you, okay, what's the number one point of this story that matches with 411 stories? And I'd ask people to raise their hand. Somebody'd say canines. Exactly. Canines were used. They didn't find the body. They tracked out to a midpoint over a river. And he didn't track back, so he stayed on that bridge. Where'd he go? Up or down? Or he evaporated? Those are the only choices. What happened? Water. He's over water when this happens. Over the course of the last 12 years I've been doing this, many of you have asked me, Dave, is there some religious affiliation with the victim? Here you go. One of the strongest religious affiliations I've seen. I don't know how it could be any stronger, unless he was the head of a church. He was the primary point of religious contact at this school. Come on. Amnesia. When they released him from the hospital, he was getting back bits and pieces. Now, many of you have said, well, Dave, why don't you do regressive hypnosis? First of all, I'm not an expert. I don't know an expert. The only expert I could have really relied upon back in the day was a man named Bud Hopkins. He was outstanding. And I'd let Bud make the approach. I wouldn't have done it. And I've explained this 100 times before. When we started into missing people, I talked to missing people organizations and I said, hey, where are the landmines? They said, well, what are you going to do with this? I said, I'm going to write about them. And they said, well, if you're going to write about the stories, don't contact the victims. Why is that? Because you're going to be re-victimizing them after they tell you their story. You use that information and you put it in a book, they've got to all relive that again. I said, okay, so what would you do? He said, do your research, write the story, but don't bring them into it unless they offer to come into it and talk to you about it. And that's happened several times. And as long as the people come to me, then I feel good about talking about it with you. But I will never break a confidence. Somebody says, hey, Dave, I'll tell you something, but I don't want it leaving this room. It won't leave the room. And I've written a lot of books. As an author, I have a privilege that I never have to release a source. And there's been a lot that I just won't even talk about. I'm not going to even tell you the story because I can't tell you the contact. A lot of people are offended when you say, yeah, here's the story. Oh, this is really neat. Who told you? I can't tell you. I don't like it when people do it to me, so I just don't do it. I hope you understand. Some of you will say, oh, I don't care, Dave, tell us anyhow. Yeah, well, So, that was the last piece of information I could get on Stephen. That was way in April when the incident happened in February, and even get that much later on about somebody is very hard to do. So I'm going to guess since Stephen had such a support system around him at the school, at the family, by his kids, my guess is he probably fully recovered and went back to school and is teaching again. But if I was the wife, I'd never let him go back to that wildlife open space again. No way. No way. In fact, I probably wouldn't let him go anywhere in any open space district again by himself. No way. If you think about that book I've written, Missing 411 Hunters, how many people at that point of separation, something happens and someone disappears? Too many to count. So I appreciate you being here. The kindness revolution. Doesn't cost us to be kind. Doesn't cost us anything. A smile, a thank you. Somebody's helping you at the store. Hey, thanks a lot. Look them right in the eye. Hey, thank you. Hope you have a great day. It doesn't cost you anything. I was at Costco the other day. I was buying some muffins. And I was trying to understand how you scan these two muffins. It was 2 boxes of muffins for the price of one. And they said, oh, I'll help you with that. They were really friendly. They came over and helped us, this and that. And they walked away, and I went through the transaction, and I got all my stuff in the box, and I picked it up. I walked over to that lady. I said, hey, I wanted to say, thank you very much. You're really helpful. I bet hardly anyone does it to her. That's why she just walks away. I don't know. Maybe it meant nothing to her or more to me, but didn't hurt me to do it. Be kind. Remember, you can buy our books at a place called NA, North America, BigfootSearch.com. NA, BigfootSearch.com. We have a huge book release going on right now. Just released a new book. Hopefully you'll go there and look. Missing 411, Washington State. Number 3 in the state series. And it is a good book. I'm telling you. It's got some stories in there that'll blow your socks off. And a driving map and a cluster map come with it. And I just released a new hat. Remember I told you what Liberty is? Liberty is on the front of the hat, along with artwork of a bald eagle by the greatest artist I know, Harvey Pratt. Check it out on our website, NABigfootSearch.com. Have a great week. Paulides out.